Welcome to the Farm Family Harmony podcast. I'm Elaine Froese, Farm Family Coach, here with another episode full of transition tips, tactics, and sometimes hard truths to get harmony on your farm. Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Farm Family Harmony podcast. I'm Elaine Froese, Farm Family Coach, and really excited for you to hear again today from one of our coaching team, Lydia Carpenter. So Lydia and I are going to ponder and perk around the whole concept about being an emotionally strong farm leader, and this is for all ages and stages. But before we get started, Lydia, let's just jump in and tell us how things are on Lunafield Farm.
Oh gosh, things are great. We're going to get more snow. We've got an Alberta clipper coming and we need moisture, as many of you can appreciate. So for folks that I haven't met, maybe from a previous podcast or as part of the coaching membership or as your farm transition coach, I'm Lydia Carpenter and I live in southwestern Manitoba. I'm part of Elaine's team. I run a diversified farm, mostly cattle, with my partner, Vian Prinsloo, and I'm in a non-family transition. Things are good on the farm. Waiting for more snow.
Good. And so you have been dealing with a lot of ranch families and farm families on our team for the last couple of years, and you're now a executive certified coach with Royal Roads, which is really exciting because a lot of the listening and intentionality around helping people move forward has really been enhanced by the training that you took with Royal Roads, Lydia. So I wanted to talk about being an emotionally strong farm leader based on my friend Carolyn Stewart. I'm just holding up her book. This is the inspiration for our podcast today. This is her new book. I wrote about it in an article. But Lydia, what are you discovering when you're working with farm leaders and farm founders? So we use this expression of Dick Whitman, stepping back without stepping away, but we don't want people to disappear.
Yeah, and thinking about that phrase, stepping back without stepping away, it's stepping back and rising to the occasion of becoming an emotionally strong leader without stepping away. And often I'm talking to founders in their farm, they might be at the stage where they're starting to talk about transition, or tensions are rising because there isn't a lot of open communication. And I've heard people say things like, I've been doing this for so long, I'm too old to change. Or
response.
No, even just looking at conflict behaviors and the way things have been going, just feeling a bit of a helplessness around the direction that things are going to be moving. And part of this too is we work with families, but it's also coaching or providing support to those that are in a leadership role to kind of step into that space.
Well, yeah. And what I'm curious, the other reflection I have from decades of doing this is quite often in the farm dads, or the farm founders, as we call them, moms and dads, they start to tell us they're starting to feel a little beat up. And that's not the intention. We're not beating anybody up by asking them how they're going to step back without stepping away. But to talk about what kind of language that young farmers listening to this could use, because we also, I think, have found young farmers who go, Elaine, I'm not getting training from my dad or my mom. I don't know how to run a farm business. And every time I try and ask, there's a blow up. And so what does it mean to be emotionally strong in your framework as a coach?
I mean, there are some, when you think about folks that are strong leaders, there are different traits and qualities. One of them is accountability, adaptability, creativity, confidence, empathy, integrity, and stability. These are all really excellent traits in leadership.
Emotionally healthy people you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think part of it actually is the accountability piece, in the sense that we often turn to self-blame or blaming others when things are uncomfortable or not going well, or if we're asked for, and I say we as people, human beings, if we're asked for a certain degree of accountability, and it also, I think the language we use with each other is really important here. We often encourage people to use I statements to talk about how they feel, but accountability is, I think, part of that is self-reflection. and we often move into self-blame. So it's my fault. I didn't.
Or self-criticizing.
Or self-criticizing. Yeah, exactly. And I think accountability is really key. So being able to be accountable first and to really understand, like, what am I as leader thinking, feeling, needing, and wanting, and then being able to hear others differently.
Okay, let's just land on that for people that are out putting something on the field or chasing cats right now, whatever they're doing. There's the golden nugget for you, or what some people call the mic drop. I think, I feel, I need, I want. And emotions are around feelings. In our conflict dynamic profile that we do with our clients, one of the strong positive conflict behaviors is the ability to express emotion. And in Carolyn's book, on page, because I've got a bookmark in it, on page 238, it has a whole checklist here of, emotions. I feel relieved, I feel inspired, I feel happy, I feel intimidated, I feel frustrated, I feel disappointed, I feel overwhelmed. And I think there's a lot of overwhelming anxiety about the uncertainty of the future, Lydia, of the farm families that you're working with. So you mentioned I statements. I think, I feel, I need, I want. What else is helpful for being a strong emotional farm leader? Express yourself.
And just and just pausing on what you said there, Elaine, that like it's a difficult industry that we're in. And so there are a lot of variables, a lot of challenges. And so it can be like, for those of you that are listening to, for us to kind of list off these things, it can just feel really overwhelming. But it's like taking it one step at a time. So just recognize, okay, what does self-reflection for me in this moment look like? And that's part of also like being adaptable. I think in agriculture and we often think about how are we going to mitigate difficult circumstances. So how do we manage our risk?
Right.
What are the mitigating factors so we can manage this risk? But also the concept of being adaptive is not new to us, right? Like, we adapt in our crop and grazing planning, for example. But how do we adapt to shifting dynamics within our families and within our teams, but also like within ourselves, right? So as we new ages and stages, like how do we adapt emotionally, or like to better understand and better, and the term better is maybe not right, but build resiliency so that we can become.
Well, and I think when you mention ages and stages, I have the map that is from my Hudson coaching training. 20-year-olds need independence. 30-year-olds need to master success. 40-year-olds need equity and security and recognition. 50-year-olds need simplicity of life and competency to know that what their work counts. But a 60-year-old listening to this is thinking, man, my back's getting sore. Do I become the hired person again? And what does stepping back without stepping away? What is my new role going to be? And I think that when you talk about adaptability, Lydia, that's the big thing, right? Because, you said at the beginning of this conversation, I'm too old to change. No, everybody is, as a John Maxwell quote, change is inevitable for all of us in agriculture, but growth is optional. And those farmers listening to this who have a growth learner mindset and not a judger one are going to be so much happier and so much more aligned to what is helping them find their sweet spot for leading their farm team and also being part of the farm team. So adaptability is so we talked about self-reflection as being a key thing. And I just tell people, get off your phone and shut your radio off and get some quiet. And I laugh sometimes when you tell me, oh, Elaine, I'm going out to a slough in the backyard to read my country guide. And Lydia does this, folks. That's how she gets reflection. She takes her favorite country guide. And I want to do a shout out to Country Guide while I just mentioned it. It's got a great issue here, When She Leads. This is the February 2024 issue. But it's a thing, folks. And Country Guide is a farm management magazine, how to do farming better kind of thing. And we have to understand that everybody takes leadership, not just the farm founders. So tell me about the young ranchers and farmers that you're working with, and what are they doing to be emotionally strong leaders from their generation?
Yeah, I mean, so these traits, I think, well, first is the learner mindset, as you mentioned. If someone, like, if you can adapt and have a learner mindset, this kind of becomes a bit exciting, even though it is challenging. And I think this is for, like you mentioned, the age and the stages. This is for everybody, right? To recognize, what skills or what traits make an emotionally strong leader. And often we will hear from folks like, well, the young generation is waiting for their founders to take the next step, and the founders are waiting for the next gen to take the next step. And this is where really open communication is helpful, but that everybody, like, you need systems of accountability in your farm. Adaptability is learned over time. And so the founders often have more experience with this than their next gen, especially if you've been through challenging times like BSC or lower crop prices, drought. And so that kind of is also where you come into this as a mentor. But for the next generation coming up, there's lots of resources. We have to talk about peer management groups. Elaine and I, we've traveled to areas where folks are potentially more isolated, and so that can be a bit of a challenge. But seeking opportunity to engage with your peers, and to do it from the approach. Yeah.
Sorry, let's just put a pause in that right there. What is peer management group, Lydia? Like somebody who's out on a ranch in Montana listening to this, or up in the Peace River where you and I have been a couple of times, or even in southwestern Ontario where people are feeling pushed out by the encroachment of urbanization. How do you find your people, or how would you recommend for someone listening to this thinking, I need more skill, understanding how to deal with my emotions and how to step into asking for what I need? Because I think a lot of young farmers, I often have this thing that I say when I'm speaking from the platform, you do not have because you do not ask. And so how do young farmers ask to get connected? And does it need to be all the same ages? Like, I know we're big fans of Ranching for Profit, so maybe use them as an example.
Yeah, like Ranching for Profit's one example, and they have their executive link groups, and that would, like, there'd be all kinds of folks in those as far as ages and stages go. I listed off at the top kind of a number of factors that contribute to being an emotionally strong leader, but confidence and creativity were two of them. And I think it's a challenge for farmers and young farmers sometimes in your own region, like feeling secure enough to ask for what you want, because often we're looking over the fence, we feel the judgment of others. And so really looking at like where you are as an opportunity. So just reaching out to folks and saying, what is available to me? And I have found personally that, like, trying to be creative about peer networks, sometimes you extend beyond borders. It might be outside of your province, or even on the other, south of the border in the US. And so, Executive Link is one. I have talked to folks who are part of like grazing management groups or grazing clubs. There are, groups like Power Farmer, or in farm organizations in different provinces, and different provinces will have different organizations.
I'm thinking of Keystone Egg Producers CAP in Manitoba that has a young farmers group, and spoke to Iowa, to the Iowa young farmers. So there are, like you say, through farm bureaus and farm policy organizations, there are peer networks that work that way too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, often, and I think too, sometimes what happens is you kind of stick within your production group. And we had a peer management group several years ago. We had all kinds of different farm sizes and scales, different production systems, different commodities that were being produced, because ultimately, like, the conversations were around farm business management and some of the key elements of like financial transparency, financial management, accountability, being able to adapt, and hiring employees and all those sorts of things.
So I had another thought. There's a young farmer named Brad. He goes to my church. Great guy. They have a Snapchat group.
Yeah, exactly.
You could have a WhatsApp group. You could do all kinds of different things to support each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's, part of being creative is kind of, being able to think, okay, where are the blind spots or the gaps? And this is for the founders and for the next gen to think about, creating learning plans. And you mentioned a learner mindset. Learning plans can be great for everybody. Like I keep a learning plan, and things that I have interest in or areas that I'd like to develop further, I keep in my learning plan. And that can obviously, these things feed into each other, right? These different elements. So if you can become more creative it helps build your confidence, and then you're more accountable to your team as well.
And accountability means walking the talk and doing what you said you would do. And so for an older farmer listening to this, thinking, well, my time's up. I don't know what I can contribute anymore. That, again, is negative, self-criticizing kind of thinking. And I would like everyone listening to this podcast to embrace what is part of my core wiring, which is lifelong learner. And that's what I think you are too, Lydia. Like, there's always something more to get better at. And again, you also said self-reflection, but I think the other thing in Carolyn Stern's book here that she talks about too is being open to feedback. So we have a tool. It's called it's from Dick Whitman's toolbox. It's called the performance appraisal. It's 9.2 in his filing system. That's how I refer to it. But the question is, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? But here's the key question I love. How can management on this farm support me better? And what is my learning plan for the next year? So basically what it is, and I've spent up to 3 hours with 3 farmers, the father, the son-in-law, and the son. We spent 3 hours on this sheet one time, Lydia, and it was a great exercise because everybody was open to having difficult feedback, really affirming what the strengths are, but then looking at what the weaknesses are, or the things that needed to be accountable. And this one young farmer, he was terrible about being on time, and he was supposed to be training into a management position, but he wasn't showing up on time, and he wasn't leading the rest of the team the way he was supposed to be, right? So for anyone listening to that, if you want a copy of this one pager, it's a great way to start those conversations. Just reach out to farmfamilycoach.com and ask for 9.2, and we'll whip it off to you. So of all the things that we've talked about, Lydia, with figuring out the creativity and curiosity, the ability to use I statements, the ability to be self-reflective, what else? What do you do with these resistant older farmers who say, Elaine, Lydia, I can't change. I'm too old to change.
And I will, and to be very clear, this is actually the I would say this is the minority. Particularly, sometimes it starts like that because I think people just don't feel encouraged, or they're isolated, right? So the sense is the feeling they feel discouraged. Like we say this, like sometimes your head is below the waterline, and so it's like to bring people above the waterline to say, okay, what are the possibilities here? And sometimes people are, to your point, like sometimes people are ready to really step away from the farm, and to allow and to create space for the next generation to come in, but sometimes there's still foundational work that has to be done, and so there is a transition period.
Yeah. And another thing I think we should talk about is the whole idea of respect. For wisdom of the wise elders. I like to call the founders the wise elders, and I've had founders say, Elaine, my biggest fear is that when I transition this wealth, this equity to the next generation, my opinion's not going to count anymore. And so it's again, you can't, my take is that if you don't like what you see going on in the culture of your farm, which is how people are, what they believe to be true, how they're behaving and how they're making decisions, then I say, what are you doing to get it out of your head and onto the table so you can actually start creating solutions about what's not working for you, what's a disconnect. So how would you encourage, Lydia, I guess my question is, how would you encourage the younger generation to show lots of respect for the wisdom and experience of the older generation? And how would you encourage the older generation not just to step back and just think that everything is going to be okay?
Well, and this takes practice. And we talk about empathy, like putting yourself in the other person's shoes.
And perspective.
Yeah. And having perspective. And this is, I think, also where, being like having some kind of peer management group or just support group can be really helpful, because you are able to then communicate kind of what's going on in your farm to other people and get perspective from them. And sometimes people outside of your farm really value your contribution, and so, yeah, we see this where we're facilitating for folks, and the founders say, I just don't feel appreciated, or like the next generation really understands what it took to build this. And I'm a first generation farmer, so I have a bit of perspective on what it means to be first gen. But then again, for me personally, I'm often closer in age to the next gen of these other operations, so I can kind of, I can relate and understand, often what the founders are saying. And I mean, part of the challenges is they're not going to know, like, this is what happens in family businesses, not just agriculture. I think the stat is like 13 to 60% of family businesses move from the first to the third, make it to the third generation.
And it's less than 15% make it beyond.
Yeah. And that's often because, well, there's structural issues, I think, that arise, but it's often because by the third generation, they don't necessarily understand or appreciate what the founders or what the folks that started it had to do to make it work. And I guess my encouragement would be like, it's going to be hard. It is a challenge if you haven't done it, to know what it feels like. But even if you are, if you're getting to the stage where your kids are at an age where they're stepping in, developing new enterprises that they're fully responsible for and have to put money into and have equity for. Like, we think of the farm, I think, as like as one entity, like one thing, but within that you can have various enterprises. And a lot of the stuff, I think, is learned through doing. And so this is why we say transition can take 10 to 20 years, because you're creating the foundation early on to build that appreciation in. Right. And so
Right. And that's also part of how you communicate with each other. And we're back to the language that you use. Because when I was a student coach 20 years ago with Hudson, Tom Hugler, who's a wonderful coach of mine as a student coach in Minneapolis, he had research around family business that it was lack of appreciation, pride and stubbornness, and lack of forgiveness that would really sideswipe a transition plan or a succession plan.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that you're talking around mindset is that a lot of people say, oh, Elaine, give me the checklist for transition. I go, whoa. Every family dynamic is unique. Every farm business is unique. And I like to see it more as a journey. This is not roundup. This is not just check off the list and you're done in 10 weeks or 10 months. And so the idea that you are on a leadership journey together to be clear with each other and to learn from each other. And like you say, when you have a learning plan for both generations, not just for the successor, but also for the older generation, then you have a target to hit, because then you're not just talking about, having this nice conversation as you're walking to the barn. Then you actually have timelines and dates in place to create certainty for the targets that you want to hit for your learning plan too, I think.
Yeah, and I think what's a challenge, I mean, there's a couple of things, and I recall you may have said this some time ago when asked, how young or at what point do we start talking to our kids about transition? And
4 years.
Yeah, as soon as possible. And really what it is you're creating a frame of reference for your young children to understand what the business is. But if you don't understand it personally, because we've worked with farmers where, the farm is only transitioned to them at
a very late stage.
Yeah. And so they're kind of holding both spaces, where they're like the next gen, and now they're in the position to transition it again. And so this is foundational work. So understanding your business is key, like understanding, like, the operations of your own business, so that you can then talk to even your kids at a young age, that they understand and start to build that appreciation in early. And that's really the empathy piece. It's like you want your children to be able to understand where you're coming from and be in your shoes. At the same time, trying to understand what it's like to be a young farmer. I talk to a lot of young farmers who are not, they can't purchase land. So they are, they're running on mostly leased acres, for example, and they're not able to.
What does that feel like when it's the death of a dream too, Lydia? Because there's emotion around that as well, right? There's grief around hopes and dreams and expectations, which now in this time and space that we're in agriculture with high land values. I've got another Country Guide magazine right here on my desk, The New Land. And this is another really good article. People can find this online. If you're listening to this, you just go to country-guide.ca. This is the November 23 issue, all the challenges of how high prices of land. And I think the other thing that it takes when you're an emotionally strong leader, you're okay to talk about finances. talking about money is not evil, as one of my audience said. So let's just unpack that sort of as we close off here a little bit in terms of the emotions around money and the financial transparency that is so important to help have success, to treat this farm as a business.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that comes up as far as the traits of a strong leader, stability, and I just think stability generally, because instability to me is like uncertainty. So there is certainty and chaos. Yes, so there is uncertainty in agriculture. There is uncertainty, around, like you're saying, Elaine. I mean, land values have gone up over the years. We can kind of predict that, but there's uncertainty for young farmers about how to build equity into the
and what they can build.
And what they can build, yeah. And so as a leader, creating some stability to increase certainty, and stability takes a certain amount of planning and predictability. So that because uncertainty is a high predictor of of conflict, I think, for families. And it's really difficult to live in uncertainty for long.
And on our key challenge sheet, which we give as part of our intake process, there is the line that says, is one of the challenges on your farm decreasing anxiety over the uncertainty of your future? So the payoff for being an emotionally strong farm leader, whether you're next gen or whether you're the founding generation, whatever age and stage you're at, everybody in my framework needs to show up being a leader and being emotionally healthy and decreasing that sense of anxiety and overwhelm. And I think if we can just reiterate again to the people listening to this podcast, clarity of expectations, being able to be emotionally free to say, I need respect, I need an income stream, I need a good place to live, and I need to have some sense of fairness in helping everyone be successful, whether they're in this business or they're my non-farm heirs. So certainty and clarity of expectations is huge. And then what you talked about, the learning plan and having time and a space for having a place to have difficult feedback, because there needs to be agreements in place. And I'd also throw out to the listeners, just Google strong warning for 80-year-olds. For those of you who've hung on too long, and I'm very not happy as a coach when I meet an 84-year-old who just has not been able to let go of equity to the next generation, because his sons and daughters are in their 60s and then the next gen's in their 30s. And so there's a lot of movement, Lydia, I think, in just being clear about how you want to show up in the culture of your farm as an emotionally strong leader. So as you sum up, what are the 3 things that you would like people to really hang on to from our discussion today? But what are the 3 next steps that would be helpful? Because when we're coaching, we always say, okay, we've had this conversation of all the things that we've talked about. What's the most important thing, and what are your next steps?
Well, I'd say first, I've said this before, but out of conflict comes creativity.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to lean into those difficult conversations, and if you can't do it on your own, seeking support to be able to do that. For young farmers, for the next gen, I would say really some self-reflection on, are you ready to step out of being in the role of an employee and into the position of being entrepreneur? And for the founders, can you create space for that? Do you have what you need, the tools that you need to create that space for your next gen? Right. So having those conversations, and then building empathy takes work over time, but stepping back when you are in these moments that you are moving into either blame or self-criticism, and thinking what would it be like to be in the other person's shoes, and can they feel what it might be like to be in my shoes, and if not, how do we get closer to that? And so, yeah, I would say creativity and addressing leaning into conflict and tension. And conflict is not bad. You'll hear us say that all the time. And empathy, and then the accountability of moving from an employee to being an entrepreneur, and therefore being a leader.
Right. That sounds great. So folks, we hope that this has been helpful to you. And again, I'll just take my Beanie Baby Bull by the horns and say, this is what this is about. It's about having the ability to use positive conflict behavior, such as creating perspective, be adaptable, have that time of self-reflection. And perhaps you'd like to grab a copy of Carolyn Stern's book, The Emotionally Strong Leader, read Country Guide, read it online. And again, reach out to us if you'd like to have the performance feedback sheet 9.2. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us here at Farm Family Harmony Podcast. And share it with your friends and let us know what you'd like us to talk about next. Remember, it's your farm, it's your family, it's your choice, and you have the power to find harmony through understanding. Take care. Bye for now.